A decisive election followed by a stock rally has encouraged some about the financial road ahead, but the kitchen table economy may tell a different story. One man who will be explaining both the over and understory is David Brancaccio. He's the host and senior editor of Marketplace Morning Report, which you hear every weekday here on WJCT, and he joins me now. David Brancaccio, welcome.
It's a real pleasure to be here.
We're thrilled to have you, and we're thrilled that you're going to be in town tomorrow. How difficult is it to forecast what a Trump presidency will mean for the nation's economy?
Well, it's one thing for me to forecast. It's another thing for the guardians of interest rates at the Federal Reserve to try to do that. We were just exploring that this week. I talked to some economic forecasters who keep getting asked in the wake of President-elect Trump's victory, why doesn't the Federal Reserve take action now to prepare for some of the things that are going to happen given the policies that the president, the new president, the incoming president says he's going to explore? And the answer is the Fed doesn't take action on things that haven't happened yet. A lot of things get said in a campaign. And what the Fed does is react to conditions on the ground and once policies in place. But there are forecasts, if you take the president-elect at his word, that he's very interested in tariffs applied to certain countries. He is going to uh, be very focused on the border, particularly the southern border, and there are expected to be deportations. That has a major effect on the US labor market. So some people worry about inflation, higher prices. One thing that is pretty much a slam dunk, I think, in this new administration is a renewal of the Trump era tax cuts, which are set to sunset in the near future. And so if those are renewed, and maybe there will be offsetting spending cuts, I think that's what Mr. Musk is been charged to do. But if there aren't enough cuts and the tax cut is extended, there'll be more government borrowing. And more government borrowing, more demand. And that can drive up prices as well. So that's just the start.
And we know that you do a lot of really good reporting on sometimes the disconnect between what's happening on Wall Street and with the markets and what's happening on Main Street with people in their own pocketbooks. Sometimes those things are connected if people have like a retirement fund, but very often those are representing very different universes. And so when we see a gain following the election, does that indicate anything to you about a larger stock market that is, strong and buoyant, or is that, and I know it's impossible to sort of predict markets, but does that mean anything to ordinary people?
Well, I mean, I think we do need to remind ourselves that lots of people do have stocks directly or indirectly. They may not own individual stock, but they may have it through some retirement plan, through a union, or and so forth. So a lot of people are connected directly. There is this Trump trade. This is a bet by some stock investors in lower regulation ahead of industries that might help boost profits. For instance, the tax cut that we were just talking about might boost profits. But the stock market has been extraordinarily strong. I mean, it's been amazing. Yet, what did voters tell exit pollers? That a lot of people feel the economy is passing them by, isn't working for them. This is something I've been covering for 30 or 40 years. It's not new to me. When you actually talk to people, life can be very hard. The cost of renting a place to live, the cost of buying a place to live. It is true that gas prices are down 12% in the last year. It is also true that used car and truck prices are down a bit in the last year. But have you seen insurance? Now, in Jacksonville, you'll certainly know the prices of home insurance, but it's also vehicle insurance, up 14%. This makes things very hard for people to make ends meet, when you're around the kitchen table. And I think that accounts for a lot of the alienation that people were expressing to exit pollers and probably expressing with their votes.
You led by talking about, people asking why the Federal Reserve isn't or could they prepare for some of these changes that we're expecting. But what about corporations? Are they preparing in any way for perhaps occasional shocks to the system. I mean, I think we know that under the original Trump presidency, there would be these moments where he would criticize on Twitter, whether it was Nordstrom or Toyota or Ford or Lockheed Martin, and there would be these sort of seismic shifts, at least in the short term, with their stocks and their values. Are there preparations happening at the corporate level for those kind of surprise events or just a general expectation of certain volatility in how the president sometimes talks about the business world?
Right now, as we speak, I guarantee you, Ann, there are staff meetings around the country at probably every company talking about just this. If you're in the fossil fuel, oil and gas industry, those meetings with staff are elated. Everybody's going yeehaw, an exciting time from that perspective. I also talked to an employee of a multinational car company who they had the staff meeting the other day. And there are opportunities in some of the policies that are promised by Donald Trump. If the US consumer is unleashed by the higher stock market somehow, maybe people will buy more cars. But the company is concerned about a couple of things. It's concerned about, for instance, tariffs, since they're international companies. So I think just about everybody's having that meeting now, trying to parse out, okay, people make promises during campaigns. To what extent can they execute on them? And the fact that the House of Representatives and the Senate are now both led by Republicans, same party as the White House, does increase the chances that promises become reality.
Is this a historic moment in terms of a single presidency with such great potential to impact not just the national, but the global economic picture? Or is that overstating the case?
Well, I think one of the trends we're going to see, it's a little bit outside my beat, right? But some of it is clearly within the marketplace beat, which is it's expected that the US is going to look more inward, try to take more care of people inside the borders, and withdraw from some international alliances. And that puts burdens on other major global players. I just talked to the editor in chief of The Economist magazine, Zanny Minton Beddoes, on the air. And she was talking about Europe's perspective. In other words, Europe's going to have a larger burden to try to figure out how to help Ukraine in its war with Russia. And there's questions of NATO funding, but also the world trading system. If the U.S. pursues more policies, hardline policies, some involving tariffs, that's a lot of friction in the world trading system. And the bet that President-elect Trump is trying to make is, will that accrue to American jobs? Will that accrue to the pay that we give Americans? We'll see. I mean, people who pay those paychecks, employers, also have a different perspective on this. They want to sell more products, but they're also concerned about higher labor costs.
Does it strike you, though, as uniquely consequential, this election, this next presidency?
Well, we know just right out the bat, just because the House and Senate controlled by Republicans, the executive branch controlled by the Republicans, that'll be very consequential. But President-elect Trump is a firebrand, and he is very clear that norms are not for him, and so this is probably the most consequential presidential election result of my lifetime. I'm only 22 years old, so
Right.
maybe I'll see more. But it's I've never seen anything like this. It'll be fascinating to cover, and it'll be interesting times to live through. I got to tell you.
But we should talk a little bit about your career. I mean, your marketplace career dates to an internship in 1989, but you hosted the program for 10 years between 1993 and 2003. You then co-hosted Now with Bill Moyers on PBS, and then you returned to Marketplace in 2011. So you have an enormous breadth of, reportage in that time. Um, is the role of financial journalism, economic journalism, I mean, how significant is it right now? And is that job getting more difficult?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly remains fascinating. When I went to London as Marketplace's European correspondent in 1990, the whole issue was European integration, countries coming together, breaking down barriers between nations. And what's the story that we're just talking about now? It's things moving in the opposite direction, not just in the US, but also Britain, Brexit, and so forth. But the general move was, during the lifetime of my program, Marketplace, was more responsibility placed on employees to manage their own retirement. There was this thing that some people remember from the old days. I mean, they still exist, but it's the defined benefit pension plans where your employer had a pension and then told you what you'd get paid upon your retirement. And the basic trend was to dismantle those. And if you were lucky enough to work for a company that had some kind of 401k or 403b, they'd give you some money. Maybe they would match it, and it would be up to you to figure it out. So that's where Marketplace, in part, came in. Now we have a broader mandate. We do workplace culture, we do innovation. We try to have this unconventional take. We try to be playful in some of our coverage because let me tell you, they call economics the dismal science. And in the wrong hands, it certainly can be. But I don't know if you've heard this week, I knew, well, it's in fact last week on the air, we had this. I knew that the first week after the election would be an intense time, regardless of what your politics are. There's been a lot of coverage of election related stuff. People may have needed a little bit of a break. So what we did last week was we did something we think instructive, compelling, teachable moments. I went to marketplaces, but not necessarily financial markets. I went to 5 that were near enough to Marketplace's world headquarters in Los Angeles. And they all began with F, it turned out. We didn't plan it that way, but that's how that's what life handed us. We went to a big flea market, a flower market, a fish market, I'm forgetting one, a farmer's market, and the other one was a market for finery. That was the stretch. That was a
Huh?
precious gemstones.
Uh-huh.
And we went with pros, professionals, people who knew the markets, and they told us the inside out of how to negotiate those markets. And I think it informs our relationship with all places where humans conduct commerce face to face.
It was a great series. I really enjoyed the fish one and the crazy hours that they keep. It was just astonishing work cycle. I want to just talk to you a bit ahead of your visit here. You're going to be sitting down with our CEO, David McGowan, as part of a conversation about the work that you're doing. What do you what do you plan to talk about here in Jacksonville?
Well, we'll talk about a lot of those things we'll talk about the aftermath of the election. But it's interesting, a defining feature of the economic side of this election, a lot of factors came to play in the election of Donald Trump, not just economics. They say it's the economy stupid. It wasn't quite just the economy stupid in this case. But a key issue that I've been following for years, a lot of reporting on, thinking about, is inequality, economic inequality in America, the gap between rich and poor. There was a time that some people said if you talk about inequality, you must be some kind of liberal. You must be on the left side of the political spectrum. And I think one of the recognitions here with this election is that inequality is being faced by people on all sides of the political spectrum. And we have an incoming administration that understands that the economy is passing too many people by, that the system isn't lifting up enough Americans. And I think the mechanics of inequality are fascinating. One of the interesting wrinkles that may come up when I'm talking live just has to do with something we've seen in the past year, Anne. Inflation, the rate of growth of prices, has tamped down. The big surge of inflation, 9% from a couple of years ago, now that's gone, but prices haven't gone back to pre-pandemic levels. And that's what really makes people frustrated. And I get frustrated myself when, I pay crazy amounts for what should have been something cheap. But at the same time, wages have been going up, and real wages, in many cases, outpacing inflation. Well, this is how the brain works. We blame inflation on our elected officials, but when we get raises, we think it's us. We think it's because we're awesome
Hmm.
and that we achieved this. And it's, of course, then frustrating if you get a raise to see a lot of it, but not all of it, eaten away by inflation. But of course, it's both policy and your magnificence that leads to you getting paid more. And the psychology of inequality is really fascinating. We're going to go deeper when I get to see people, which I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it too. The issue of inequality, I think, is nationally more of a discussion than it used to be. To your point, global inequality also, you know, creating a lot of instability. And I wonder if you see any trend lines that would be hopeful on that front in any of the reporting that you've done in terms of bridging the gap or perhaps bringing kind of the pay scale somewhat into balance.
Well, there's all sorts of fascinating things, and when I meet people this week in Jacksonville, we'll actually do this interactively, and people may have their own suggestions. But here's just one: it's so bipartisan that both The Nation, which is a left-wing publication, and the National Review, which is a conservative publication, both featured the same research at one point. And it's just this: we require licenses of so many professions in America, way more than we did 50 and 60 years ago. You got to get a license to do just about any profession. And that's a barrier to entry to new people, younger people, fresher people who may have new approaches and could do it cheaper. Licenses protect the people who've been doing it already. It keeps prices up. It also reinforces the economic divides. The people who are doing well continue to do well because of these barriers. What if you remove some of those barriers? So an interesting example is in Nevada. I read in some of this research that you need like 12 or 1400 hours of study to get an optician's license to do eyeglasses in Nevada. In California, the total number of hours required to get an optician's license is zero. Okay,
Wow. Wow.
there's a lot less friction in California. Are there more people visually impaired running around California because of incompetent people prescribing eyeglasses? No. So why are those barriers to entry for people who might do eyeglasses? Why aren't they lower? And so that's a structural, bipartisan way of helping to ease the gaps between the people who are already doing well and the people who want to do well. Many more interesting innovations that we can talk about this week when I get there.
Well, it's fascinating. It's an evening with David Brancaccio, Wednesday, 6 to 8. As I said, you're going to be joining WJCT's president and CEO, David McGowan. David Brancaccio, thank you so much. We really look forward to meeting you in person.
Yeah, I can't wait to meet everybody. So thanks for having me.
Thank you.